Hello friends, and welcome back to this course titled as Introduction to Indian Writing in English. Friends, we successfully completed Unit 12 with a very seminal text, The Inheritance of Loss by Kiran Desai. In this unit, Unit 13, we are starting with a very famous essay, The Anxiety of Indianness, Our Novels in English. This work is written by a writer, Meenakshi Mukherjee, who was professor in Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. This text, this essay was published in her Sahitya Akademi award-winning book. That book is very famous and one of the most popular seminal texts into Indian writing in English. The contribution of Meenakshi Mukherjee in this field of Indian writing in English is immense. Right now she is not in this world, she passed away, but in this lecture we would be able to know little more about the author and her works. But before beginning the lecture, it is my duty to tell you what you are going to learn from this lecture. What will be the lecture outcome? After the completion of this lecture, you would be able to appreciate the author and her works as a seminal text. Friends, Meenakshi Mukherjee was a teacher. She was a professor in the university. You are also college students. You have faced that kind of association, that kind of attachment with your teachers. And I hope that when we will discuss this text and we will talk about this author, you would also be able to feel that kind of association, that kind of appreciation for this author, Meenakshi Mukherjee. With this note, let us try to begin the talking about the wide, let's say, educational background and the achievements which this professor has achieved in her life. Meenakshi Mukherjee died on 16 September 2009 at the age of 72. She won Sahitya Akademi Award in 2003 for her book The Perishable Empire, Essays on Indian Writing in English. Friends, this is the most popular book of Meenakshi Mukherjee, although she has written many other books. But for this book, The Perishable Empire, she got Sahitya Akademi Award in 2003. Friends, this book, The Perishable Empire, is a collection of 10 essays. And the essay which is prescribed in our syllabus, The Anxiety of Indianness, is at the 9th position in this book. So basically, through this essay, The Anxiety of Indianness, we would be able to understand the crux of this book, The Perishable Empire. What is the intention of Meenakshi Mukherjee behind writing The Perishable Empire? And to which level Indian writing in English has reached now? After this lecture, you would be able to understand and critically analyze the journey of Indian writing in English long back in the, let's say, second half of the 19th century to the present century, that is 2021. So, she taught English literature and critical theory as a professor of English in the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. So friends, she was a teacher, she taught English literature, she taught critical theory also, and she was a professor of English in the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Before, let's say, before she passed away, unfortunately, in 2009. She was a visiting professor in several universities outside India, including the University of Texas at Austin, the University of Chicago, the University of California at Berkeley, etc. So friends, we can understand now that Meenakshi Mukherjee was an international figure. She was able to create an international identity for Indian writing in English. The universities which are named here are all renowned universities, and she was able to make a position into those universities with her intelligence and with her proficiency over this complex field of Indian writing in English. Meenakshi Mukherjee, in her detailed and informative essay, Beginning of the Novel, traces the rise of early English novel in India that was primarily aimed at an English audience and usually began with titles that would pull the attention of English towards the Orients. Friends, you people know that Orients and Occidents was the concept given by Edward Said. He considered the people from the developing countries like India as Orients and the people from the developed countries like Britain and America as Occident. Meenakshi Mukherjee was able to focus on these concepts. She wrote an informative essay, Beginning of the Novel, where she was able to trace the rise of early English novel in India that was primarily aimed at the English audience. Friends, when English was introduced into India, it was for the entertainment of the English audience. The Englishmen wanted to convert all Indians into their own culture and their own manners. They wanted to behave Indians like their servants. How their servants used to speak English in England, they expected Indians to speak in the same manner. And which is why this lady Meenakshi Mukherjee is trying to write such kind of, let's say, title like Beginning of the Novel that will pull out the attention of English towards the Orients. In this essay, she had described that how, let's say, the English emerged into the lifestyle of Orients. When the English was introduced in India, Indians were speaking their regional languages and they were happy in those. English came like a revolution into their life. It changed their life completely, their thought process completely, because through this English language, Indians were able to, let's say, interact and amalgamate the British ways of living, British lifestyle, and British ways of thinking. She says that, now this is the quotation of Meenakshi Mukherjee. We would be able to understand her, let's say, intention behind writing all these things. She says that as unlike novelists in the Indian language, who were confident about the sizable readership within their specific region, the writers in English suffered from uncertainty about his audience. Friends, here Meenakshi Mukherjee is talking about the dilemma of the early authors of Indian writing in English. Those authors, those writers didn't know that how their audience are going to react. Contrary to those novelists who were writing into regional languages like Hindi, Bengali, etc. The writers who were writing in early India in their regional languages, they knew that these will be their audience, these are the expectations of the audience, so they wrote according to fulfill those expectations. But the condition of these writers who wrote in Indian writing in English initially in the, let's say, end of the 20th century, end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, these writers were full of dilemma and confusion. The earlier tracts written by Kailas Chandra Dutt, Shoshri Chandra Dutt, among others, did not strictly adhere to the demands of the novelistic tradition. So, in that essay, this Professor Meenakshi Mukherjee, she was trying to convey this to everyone, that the writers who wrote initially in Indian writing in English, take for example Kailash Chandra Dutt or Shoshri Chandra Dutt, these were the writers who didn't know how to strictly adhere to the novel writing, because there is a tradition of novel writing which they were not aware of. The novels were written in, let's say, Britain in a way, and all the writers were following that tradition, which was not followed by these writers who wrote in India in the beginning in English language. The later novels written in the century were more obsequious and tolerant of the British rule, and many writers wrote praising the empire and paid homage to the Queen through their writings. Thereafter, a trend developed in India, and in that trend, writers tried to please Britishers from their writing. They appreciated British ways of living, British rule, and British writers. These Indian writers praised the English British Empire, and they were trying to pay a homage to the Queen through their writings, whether it is fiction or non-fiction. So we can understand, friends, that in that era, when Indian writing in English was introduced in the world literature, the writers were not at all patriotic towards Indian ways of living. They were not feeling proud towards Indian ways of, let's say, thinking. Rather, they tried to act like the Britishers, and they considered English language as a gift of Britishers to them. Krupabai Satyanathan's Kamla, The Story of Hindu Life, which was published in 1894, and Saguna's A Story of Native Christian Life, which was published in 1895, detail topical issues concerning gender, caste, religion, etc., and can be considered as first female novels in Indian writing in English according to her. So, Meenakshi Mukherjee thought that who are the first female novel writers in Indian writing in English? She highlights two famous names, Krupabai Satyanathan's Kamla, The Story of Hindu Family, and the another writer is Saguna, who wrote The Story of Native Christian Life. And these were the, let's say, novels which raised the regional issues, the topical issues related to gender, caste, religion problems in the context of India. And thus Meenakshi Mukherjee considered these novels as, let's say, the benchmarks of Indian writing in English in women writing. To the critique, Meenakshi Mukherjee, the greatest achievement of the canonical Indian English writing is not the award or critical acclaim won by the writers now, rather the breaking free from the tent, and I quote, this statement is given by Meenakshi Mukherjee. The tentativeness of 19th century novelists, not only about the writing in an acquired colonial language, but also about their readership, has been replaced by an overwhelming confidence among post-colonial writers that the English language belonged to them as much as to anyone else. Friends, here Meenakshi Mukherjee is talking about the change in the mindset of the writers who are writing in English language and who belong to India. These writers are now claiming that English is not a foreign language to them. English is just like their own language. They can express their feelings and, let's say, the Indian setting to an extent which can make all the readers satisfied. These 19th century novelists, They were not only about writing in an acquired colonial language, but also about the readership has been replaced by an overwhelming confidence. Earlier in the 19th century, writers used to think that they have to please the colonial people because they are writing in the colonial language. But now the case is not the same. The present writers are writing in English language with lot of confidence. They are writing about post-colonial era. Somewhere they are criticizing the powers of England, America, and other colonial rules. And thus, the English language is treated, let's say, as a weapon in the hands of these people who wrote in English language in the present time. In Meenakshi Mukherjee's assessment, R.K. Narayan falls in that category of novelists who do not indulge in any generalization about what is Indian and what is Western. Meenakshi Mukherjee in this quotation says that R.K. Narayan, who was one of the founding pillars of Indian writing in English in the 20th century, can be considered as a person who never tried to generalize anything related to India or the West. He never tried to compare India or West. Rather, he tried to make Indian culture and Indian tradition superior most and established that tradition throughout the world and introduced that tradition to, let's say, the foreign readers. She further says, she is Meenakshi Mukherjee here, she further says that their characters are a curious blend of the East and the West, which all Indians are, but they refuse to shift the elements. So, Meenakshi Mukherjee is talking here about the characters of R.K. Narayan, and she says that the characters of Narayan are a blending combination of East and the West, the Eastern culture and the Western culture, the Indian culture and the European culture. And thus, the elements of praising colonizers, the elements of, let's say, praising the, let's say, British crown shifted in the writings of R.K. Narayan, who focused more on, let's say, the regional identity, who focused more on regionalism in his works. Natural to the writer of post-independence, Kamala Markandeya's novels focus on the changing socio-economic scenes. Friends, Meenakshi Mukherjee thinks that if we talk about the post-independence era in India, let's say after 1947, then there is a name, a female writer, whose name is Kamala Markandeya. She was a novelist. Her novels focused on the changing socio-economic sense in the present India, obviously. The India is now changed into its socio-economic, let's say, condition if we compare it with the globalized world. The Europe or America is not a faraway goal to reach into the economic grounds or the social grounds for a colony like India now. And such kind of determination, such kind of confidence is visible in the novels of Kamala Markandeya. Her preoccupation with the themes of hunger in Nectar in the Sieve, which was published in 1955, and Handful of Rice, which was published in 1966, and her practice of uprootedness of Indian villagers on account of the menacing growth of industrial civilization derive their vigor from Gandhi's pleading for village economy. Friends, these are the novels published by this writer, Nectar in the Sieve and Handful of Dust. They are referred by Meenakshi Mukherjee because she wanted to say that Indian villagers were feeling uprooted in the British colonial rule. But when India became independent, these people associated themselves with the industrial civilization and the growth of the country. And in this way, Gandhi's concept of focusing on, let's say, the growth of the village economy, focusing on the upliftment of the Indian economy, and thinking that Indian economy can become like that of European one, and it has a different identity in the world which India has to establish, is well presented in the works of Kamla Markandeya. So friends, we can understand that Meenakshi Mukherjee is not only a literary figure, but she has a deep knowledge of Indian society, Indian culture, Indian economy, the foundational pillars of India, and how the growth of India can be done without mimicking the Western world. Friends, this is very important to establish Indian culture different from that of West. In Indian writing in English, earlier the writers used to mimic West. They were just the reflections of the Western world. But now, the writers in Indian writing in English are trying to create a very different image of India, establish India as completely different from the Western world, having its own existence and having its own rich literary tradition. Meenakshi Mukherjee says, and I quote again, "A huge social divide exists between those have proficiency in English and those who do not. Given the fact that English today is the language not only for upward social mobility and outward geographical mobility, but also the major tool for accessing knowledge at the higher level." Friends, Meenakshi Mukherjee was a contemporary writer. She knew the Indian society, and she knew that in Indian society there are still many divisions, and those divisions exist on, let's say, the social differences and the language differences. Some people are proficient in English language who consider themselves as superior. Some people are, let's say, considering themselves as inferior because they don't know English language. Why? Because in Indian society, English today is a language not only of upward social mobility and outward geographical mobility, but also the major tool for accessing knowledge at the higher level. This is the agony of the present Indian society, about which Meenakshi Mukherjee is suggesting in her statement. Friends, this is the reality of India, that if any person who belongs to the poor class works hard and becomes rich, his social mobility changes from, let's say, downward to upward. That person quickly starts speaking and communicating in English language. What does this suggest? That the person do not appreciate speaking in regional language and consider those regional language as inferior to English language. And thus, the geographical mobility also, if the person is a traveler, first he was in India, then became an immigrant, moved to America for the job, and let's say frequently moving into other foreign countries, or let's say got the let's say the became the part of that country. Even then that person starts speaking in English language, suggesting that the English language affects the mindset if the person's circumstances change. So we can understand that English in the present century is still considered as, let's say, a mode of acquiring more and more knowledge at higher level and more exposure. Her book, The Perishable Empire, has 10 essays, and in total, in which The Anxiety of Indianness, our novels in English, falls on 9th position. So friends, Meenakshi Mukherjee wrote this book, The Perishable Empire, with a particular kind of intention. She wrote 10 essays into this book, and the essay which is prescribed in our syllabus, The Anxiety of Indianness, our novels in English, it is on the 9th position in the content of this text. Meenakshi Mukherjee had a message to convey through this text. She wanted to say that still people are in the dilemma in Indian society that Western culture is better or Indian culture is better. Western language is better or Indian languages are better. They should behave like a European or they should behave like an Indian. The similar kind of dilemma we had observed in the earlier text which we discussed, that was the inheritance of loss. And about the same problem, same conflict, same issue, Meenakshi Mukherjee is also discussing in this essay, The Anxiety of Indianness. There is anxiety, there is rootlessness which still lies in the Indian people. They think that if they are improving in their social status, economic status, then they immediately starts speaking English language and starts behaving like an American or European, suggesting that these people dislike the Indian ways of living and the Indian ways of thinking. All these things suggest that still the Western culture is dominating the regional culture, Indian culture, African culture, or any other regional culture. And in this way, the colonizer has not left his position. The colonizer is still on the same position, but trying to dominate the colonized, the colony, the people from the colony with a, let's say, new ways in the 21st century. So with this, I end my lecture here. That is all for today. Thank you for listening.